The king was booed by protesters as he left Parliament after outlining Rishi Sunak's agenda for the year ahead. Tougher sentences for the country's most serious offenders and a crackdown on grooming took center stage in the first King's speech in decades. The monarch struck a personal note when he began his speech, the first by a king in more than 70 years, by acknowledging the legacy of service and devotion to this country shown by his beloved mother, the late Queen. Reading out Prime Minister Sunak's agenda for the upcoming year, the king said the sentencing bill would be brought forward to increase the confidence of victims. Further measures would also be introduced to give police more powers to prevent new and complex crimes and child sexual abuse, he added. Despite the emphasis on crime, there was no mention of the recent pro-Palestinian protests that have been taking place across the UK, and which Ms. Braverman has described as hate marches. Her controversial plans to restrict the use of tents for people who are homeless were also not raised by the king. Ahead of the speech, anti-monarchy protesters gathered outside Parliament with placards which read, "Not my king." They could be heard booing the king as he left Parliament for Buckingham Palace once he had delivered the speech. At 1,223 words, the King's speech was the longest by a monarch at a state opening of Parliament since 2005. It began when the King noted that the COVID pandemic and the war in Ukraine had created significant long-term challenges for the United Kingdom. He said Mr. Sunak's government was focused on increasing economic growth and safeguarding the health and security of the British people for generations to come. The King repeated the Prime Minister's key pledge to bring down inflation, which currently stands at 6.7%, and said the government would support the Bank of England in that goal by taking responsible decisions on spending and borrowing. Previously announced ambitions to create a smoke-free generation were raised, as the monarch said the government would restrict the sale of tobacco so that children currently aged 14 or younger can never be sold cigarettes. The King, a lifelong environmental campaigner, also confirmed Mr. Sunak's plans to grant new oil and gas licenses, helping the country to transition to net zero by 2050 without adding undue burdens on households in the Offshore Petroleum and Licensing Bill. Elsewhere, he reaffirmed the Prime Minister's plans to introduce an advanced British standard, a new baccalaureate-style qualification for 16 to 19-year-olds that will combine and replace A-levels and T-levels, while also carrying out a crackdown on poor-quality university degrees in favor of more young people taking high-quality apprenticeships. Turning to housing, the government will bring forward the Leasehold and Freehold Bill to make it easier and cheaper for leaseholders to purchase their freehold and, it is hoped, tackle the issue of punitive service charges. The long-awaited Renters Reform Bill, under which no-fault evictions are set to be banned, is designed to increase security for renters, but it has come under criticism after Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove said he would not enact the policy until courts have been reformed. Concluding the speech, the king said, "My government will, in all respects, seek to make long-term decisions in the interests of future generations." My ministers will address inflation and the drivers of low growth over demands for greater spending or borrowing. My ministers will put the security of communities and the nation ahead of the rights of those who endanger it. By taking these long-term decisions, my government will change this country and build a better future.